Welcome back to the Femme FC Podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode with Coach Laura Harvey. I was fortunate enough to work with Laura at Reign while I was there. She came back during the season and really turned things around for us. Laura is the most winningest and longest tenured coach in the NWSL. She's coached with U.S. Soccer with the U20s. She's coached within the NWSL at Utah Royals, is an OG of the league, starting with Seattle Reign way back in the day. She's coached at Arsenal. She has such a storied career and is truly one of the legends of the women's game. And so the first guest that I'm actually a little bit nervous about because I'm just such a fan of Laura's. Laura, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I reached out to you because, like I said, I think it's really important for medical and performance practitioners to have at least a basic understanding of what's going on tactically in a game. And it helps us to understand match demands. So when we're preparing players and a team to be ready physically, it's really helpful to understand what they need to be ready for. It helps in designing rehab and all of that. So I figured there was no one better to talk tactics with than the true legendary tactician herself. So Laura, if you wouldn't mind just kind of starting with what is your overall coaching philosophy and how you like to go about implementing a style of play with the team?
Yeah, I think my overall playing style has evolved over time, but I think the fundamentals have pretty much stayed the same. I like my team to be able to press as high up the field as possible, um, and make it as hard for the opponent to break us down as possible. So the ability to be able to defend and do that consistency throughout 90 minutes is a biggie. And then with the ball, honestly play what the opponent's giving you a little bit, and we want to be able to play and keep it and move it and possess it. But if an opponent's given us the opportunity to play a bit more vertically, then we would take it. So having players that can physically achieve those things consistently is a big part of how we prepare our periodization and preparation for that.
And you mentioned they're both, having a high press higher up the field. And that, of course, is when your team is out of possession. And
Mhm.
then playing what the opposition gives you, that's when you're in possession. Would you
Mhm.
mind maybe let's take a step back for people who maybe are working in soccer for the first time or don't have a strong background in the tactical side of the game? And can you just talk through what the different phases of play are in a game?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, without the ball, there's two elements to your team without it. Structured defending, where your team has most of its numbers behind the ball, and then defensive transition moments, which is the chaotic moment between your team having the ball and losing the ball, sort of that period. Um, and what what you'd have to do physically are slightly different in those two tight phases. And then with the ball, it's the same. It's structured attacking and attacking transition stuff. So a structured attacking would be how you set your team up to be able to find the most amount of space on the field, and people do that in multiple different ways. Four at the back with two really wide centre backs and fullbacks that are high and wide. Some people do it with a three back where they have three lower, and get height and width off players higher up the field in different ways. But for me, that they are key, having those structures, but how you can find balance centrally off that basic structure is honestly the fundamental of how you find success, I believe. And then attacking transition is when you've worked really hard defensively in that structured defending moment and it works, and you stop the opponent and you either intercept the ball or they give it you, they make a bad pass, or there's a moment of interception of winning the ball. I wouldn't put necessarily a complete number on it, but maybe there's a 5 to 8 second period where that opponent is unorganized, potentially outnumbered, and it's a moment where you can decide to get at a team. So Yeah, they would be the fundamentals I would talk about.
And so the way that a team is set up from a structural perspective, both in and out of possession, kind of helps dictate what you're able to do then functionally in those transition moments. Is that correct? And
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah. And so when a team is, let's go with when a team is out of possession first and setting up structurally, what are the different ways that a team might set up structurally when they're out of possession?
Well, it's how they set up their team with the amount of people they have at the back and higher up the field is one. So, do they have two forwards? Do they have three forwards? Do they have one forward? And then the style that they want to do it in. Do they want a high press, which would mean you're trying to win the ball as high to the opponent's goal as possible? Or are you sitting in a mid block, which is letting them have it in their sort of third of the field, and then the middle third of the field, you're going to make very compact and difficult to play into? Or a team has got real threats with pace in behind you and they hurt opponents in behind you. And so you just drop off and let that team have it in their own half, really. And you sit in your own half and make it really challenging. So again, some styles of play can be based off how the coach wants to play. And honestly, coaches often have to adapt and change if the players can't physically execute what you actually want them to do.
So, in an ideal world, would you have the style of play that you want to employ with the team, and players are able to match that physically? And so, being able to, one, get the players in who have that ability, but then two, having the ability to develop that physical capacity with the players? Or is it more that might be the ideal, but the more realistic version is that here's the players you have on your squad now, which system is going to suit them the best? How do you balance that out?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. It's a balancing act. So when you're looking to bring new players in, having your sort of philosophy of what you want these players to do, and that's really evolved over the years with more technology and more ways in which we can track that stuff. You can probably find players that sit in the data that you believe is important. You can find those players now. We didn't used to be able to do that. So yeah, I would say it's a balancing act. Can you bring players in who have the talent, even, and they may not have the full characteristics of what you want to do on, say, out of possession, but they're exceptional in possession? Well, you still might take that. If they're exceptional without the ball, but they don't necessarily have the, so like a centre forward is a great example. They might be brilliant out of possession. They don't necessarily get the goals and the stats that reflect what you'd want a centre forward to have. But for a team like mine that I coach, that often is okay because the other people around that person have those attacking qualities, but that number nine having that defensive quality actually may create way more opportunities for us. So an example of that would be when we won the Shield in 2022. Out of the goals that we scored, 76% of them were in attacking transition, which
Wow.
basically says we were really good defensively and we hurt you when you were unorganized and not prepared for it. We actually didn't really hurt people that much when we had the ball and we were trying to, play all the pretty soccer that we like to play. So I think that's where I say I think my teams have evolved a lot over the years, because the game evolves and the players evolve, and what it looks like, and then I would say obviously in 2024 and 25 there was a real influx of fast, strong forwards coming to our league. So it changed the dynamic of how you had to defend. And if you sort of got to take that into account as well as what players you have on your team.
And so you mentioned earlier that in your team you like to play with more of that high block, and you told us about how that means you're kind of pushing them back into their defensive third a little bit more. what do you expect of the players on the team? And you can go like maybe position by position. What do you expect of them, or what are you asking them to do during that high block?
Yeah, I think from a forwards perspective, whether you play two, whether you play three, whether you play four, we went in that 22 season, we played with a flat four as a forward group. They've got to have the willingness and ability to repetitively sprint, and be able to do that consistently for you would hope 90 minutes. It's often unrealistic to think that, but yeah, that would be I would say for that sort of front line, the ability to repetitively sprint over 20, 30 yards would be is a huge area of training for that group. The central midfield players is probably a little bit more, they need to be the ability to repetitively do explosive actions, but they're over a shorter distance, and they've got to match that with the ability to turn and change direction very, very quickly. The wide defenders, fullbacks, wing backs, outside backs, whatever you're calling them, similar traits probably to a wide forward, repetitive sprint over long distance, and the ability to be able to sort of recover back in and have like not like a straight line movement, but a more curved movement as they recover. So that's something that you can train. And then the central defenders in these moments are honestly waiting for whatever the opponent does. And from the high pressure that we provide, we could force them into playing ball short because they don't have the ability to get it out and go long, or they're fearful of our press that's coming and they go long quickly. If they go long quickly, the centre back's responsibility 9 times out of 10 is to solve that, which could be for them, it could be a lot of space that they have to solve, and often that space is behind them. So they've got to have the ability to attack space in front and solve that. They've also got to have the ability to solve big spaces behind themselves, and understand when to solve that and when to hold and keep it high. So I would say the defenders probably have to think the most, and midfielders have to think the most, whereas the forwards, we try and make it where just if we're in high press, go together, and the people behind you are going to do all your, well, if this happens or this happens or this happens, we're going to solve it. Because I think often what happens with forwards is they think about it, and then there's the delay of them going, and that delay can just nullify everything you're trying to achieve.
And so as the forwards are pressing and like just going and letting the players behind them kind of read what happens next, are you coaching them to go with any type of intention of, okay, try to force them backwards, try to force them to the side, or force them to play a longer ball? Does that depend on the opponent?
A little bit, yeah. So we have done pressure where we force teams from this. We don't want them to play centrally, so we force them out. That's one tactic. Another tactic is you force defenders in, which often means that you're forcing that defender onto their weaker foot. So a right-sided centre-back, force that right-side centre-back inside. Now they're having to play off their left foot. So you know the ball's going to come centrally, but your hope is that it's not going to be as well executed because they're being forced to play on the side that they don't want to play on. So yeah, it depends what you're good at and what the opponent's strengths are often, of whether you go in to out, out to in, whether you're allowing, you could allow central defenders to have the ball for a certain period of time, or when they get to a certain part of the field. And then whenever the ball goes wide and they sort of pick a side, then you go. Like there can be triggering points to go. So yeah, there's a little nuance on it. But if you're really high press, you just mainly go. Go, and you're either going get them in or get them out, and keep it as basic as that.
And then kind of on the flip side of that, a low block would be more so you're compacting the shape in defensively and just not allowing space to be exploited with any kind of like vertical or diagonal passes. But what else are you asking of players if you were to do more of a low block?
It it's a little bit about being comfortable that the opponent can do what they want to do. They can do whatever they want because you're not getting pressure on the ball. So often what players enjoy from high pressing is they feel they're forcing the opponent to do something they don't want to do. When you sit in a low block, from a mentality perspective, it's the complete opposite of that. You're the one that's got to be patient. You're the people that have got to try and be strategic about where you're moving in relation to where they are, because they can do whatever they want because there's no pressure on the ball. So there's a real shift mentally, which is really hard for players, honestly. I think low block's the hardest way for a lot of players, especially if they've been coached and taught to press, which a lot of female players in this country have. So it's a lot more patient, shifting side to side until the moment that you decide as a collective where that time is on the field, that they're not going to be able to do that anymore. And low blocks can be as low as your 18-yard line. Low blocks could be 20 yards above that. So it can really determine, honestly, what you think the biggest threat is to you. And in this country, it might not just be the player threat that you have to think about of why you go in a low block. It might be the weather conditions. It might be the travel that you faced. So for us, going to places like Houston in the summer from Seattle, going there is a massive culture shock from an environment perspective. So often we don't press because we know we physically can't keep it up. So then we get more into a block. So that's another aspect of when we're talking about periodization and that type of stuff, we take into account of, well, this is probably a game we're not going to do those running numbers because we're not going to press. And even if we are, we're not going to do it for 90 minutes because we can't execute that in 100-degree weather. So, I think people saw that, and it was made news in the Club World Cup last year on the men. And I'm sure it'll be a talking point in the Men's World Cup this year, that is just something you have to deal with in this country. The climate and the travel can impact what you physically are asking of your athletes. And if you don't take that into consideration, you're probably not going to get the success that you want. So.
And then would a mid block just kind of be in between that? Like it's not quite sitting as low. Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically a low block shifted 35 yards up the field is all it is. And again, with that might be, when I talk about a hot climate, that might be something you do in a hot climate, because you don't want to drop all the way off and sit in your own half the whole game. You want to actually make it challenging for the opponent. And mid blocks are hard. Like mid blocks are hard to break down often. So because you're tempting them to play in places that you want them to a little bit more. So you do have that little bit more control of forcing them into something than maybe you do in a low block. But yeah, it's just the height you are on the field that dictates whether you'd call it a mid block or low block.
And then now let's shift into a transition moment. So let's say team is defending and wins the ball, and there's that now attacking transition moment. You mentioned before there's a couple of seconds, like 5 to 8 or, whatever it might be, of time where the opposing team is disorganized. They've just been maybe expanding their shape because they've been on the attack. And so what are you asking of your players in that transition moment of now we've won the ball?
Yeah, honestly, it again, a little bit depends where you are on the field. If you're in a high pressing team and you've won it off the press, you're probably winning it within your attacking half at a minimum. Well, if that's the case, look forward, play forward, run. get forward as quick as you can. If you're winning it from sort of a low block, mid block, and you're lower on the field, the question would be, can you look forward? Can you play forward? So the terminology shifts to a question more than a demand. And then if you can't do those things, keep it, like keep the ball then. Like let's not make it completely transitional. So yeah, that's how I would characterize those transition moments.
So it's if you're able to go forward and attack with speed, exploit the space that might be there from a disorganized defense on the other side, you do that, and that's more likely to happen further up the pitch. But then if you don't have that opportunity right away and you're more in the middle or maybe your defensive third of the field, it's okay, let's keep possession. And then we get into this, now we're in possession phase of play. And can you talk us through a little bit of your philosophy on that?
Yeah, I think again it evolves all the time. The last couple of years I've built with a back three. Even if we haven't defended in that way, we've built that way. And the reason for deciding to have more people lower is to try and entice the opponent to bring more people higher. So if we can get three at the back, and that means they bring three up, then now we've eliminated three players, and now we're going 7v7 in a big space. That could be one way. What we also try and do is have height and width for me are huge, because in the attacking phase, you're predominantly trying to make the field as big as you possibly can. How can you expose all the areas of the field vertically, horizontally? So occupying those spaces is a big area. And then it's just the nuances of how you want your team to look. Do you want your team to look like they make 18 passes before they score every goal? Well, off that structure, you can do that. If it's you're not bothered about that. You're just, if the opponent gives us space behind and we think we can exploit it, we exploit it. And you can have a mix of that. And I'm probably a mix of that. Like I would say I am pragmatic enough to say that if a team stands on the halfway line and doesn't drop and we can get the ball behind them, we should get the ball behind them. I'm also pragmatic enough to think that if teams give us tons of space centrally, let's expose that space. So I think that's the adaptability that you've got to be comfortable with. But from a physical perspective, it doesn't particularly change what you're asking your players to do.
Are there certain nuances or preferences that coaches might have in terms of how they want to exploit the space? So are there some teams or some coaches who prefer to use the width more than anything else, and they're going to rely on getting the ball down the width of the field and then looking for a service across? Or maybe there's some who really want to play through the 10 or one of the other central midfielders, combination play to then find a numbers up situation. Is that coach dependent? Is it, player dependent? How does that decision get made?
I'd say probably both. It's probably coach determined, but I think the coach probably makes the decision on the best way for them to do that based off the players that they have. So I think back to the team we had in 2021, we didn't have a forward centrally that stretched and got in behind. We had forwards in Bethany Bolsa, Marijan, who wanted to come to feet. But then we had wide players in Hughes and Pino who are deadly in behind. So, yeah, is it the way that I always want to play? No, but did it make sense with those players? Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that it's definitely coach determined, I would say. But I think that the reason they get to that is often based off what the personnel that you have.
And then in those attacking moments as well, you mentioned that, a lot of it depends on where you're at on the field. And I know there's some coaches, some teams who, let's say that you win it in more of your defensive third. Of course, what's going on in the context of the game is important. If you're up, if you're down, how much time is left, what the weather conditions are, etc. There's some coaches who say like, hey, no matter what, like we're looking for a forward pass, or we want that center midfielder to come and check to the ball and play it out, or let's play it around the back line until we find that. What exactly in the build-up phase of being in possession should a team be looking for in terms of knowing, okay, now it's time to get the ball going forward?
Yeah, I think if you've manipulated the opponent, like that's how because if you didn't need to manipulate the opponent, you'd have already played it there. So now you've seen that you don't feel you can play it wherever that is, centrally, wide, in behind, in front, whatever it is. If you've manipulated the opponent to make a choice, play in the space that they've left you. In the roundabout way. And that can be done in loads of ways. You can manipulate them by enticing them to do something that they think they really want to do, and you know that they want to do it, and then you go against it. Or you entice them to do something and it's risky, like you're in the risk phase. But if you can manipulate this, and this, you're going to get the ball to this space. And I think that is the key part of development of players is, they'll often have in their mind, well, I want to play here. Well, okay, but the opponent is not letting you do that. So now what? And that's, to me, the fun part of the game is, yeah, it makes total sense that you want to play there because of the type of player you're passing to. But opponent, whoever, is just going to smash that up. So we have to manipulate them to do something else before we end up doing that part of it. And I think that's something I really love about the game is there's those little nuances of what they're trying to do to stop us doing what we want to do and how we can still keep doing it is the fun part.
It's funny that you say that's the fun part. As you're talking through all of that, I was like, oh, that is really so much fun. It's so much fun to manipulate the opponent, like you're saying, and be strategic in your planning of how the team is going to set up for that game and how you're going to execute the game plan is those little manipulation tactics of, okay, this is what we want them to do because then we're going to do this as a result.
Yeah.
That's really fun. And so then there's the moment of, okay, now we've been in possession and now we've lost the ball, whether we've taken a shot and it's gone out of bounds or there's been a tackle, an interception, the other team has now won the ball. What is the first thing that you're asking players to do on your team once the ball has been lost?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different if it goes out of play because it can be more structured. It can be a more, throw in structure, goal kick structure. There's like structures when it goes out of bounds. If the ball stays in play, I always say to the players, you have three roles. You're either on the ball, which if you're on the ball, you need to stop that person from playing forward, or ideally win it back off them. Win it back off them, stop them playing forward, keep the ball in the area that it currently is. Are the three things that we want for someone who's on the ball. Around the ball, so I can't get to the ball, but I'm close enough to impact a passing lane, or I'm close enough to be able to screen the person that they want to pass to, and I'm ready then to intercept it, would be sort of the second role. And then away from the ball, often defenders, you're preparing yourself that these two don't necessarily get it right. And the person winning it off us has got the ability to play beyond us and be ready for that. So know where the forward is, secure them if you can, deal with the long ball, all those things come into play. So I sort of put them in little three buckets of whatever role you're in, dependent on where you are on the field, is what you need to execute. So there'll be in the modern game now, I don't think there's any team in the world that doesn't say the moment a team wins the ball back off you, go get it back quick. Because I think every stat and every data metric would tell you that is a huge element to the game that can stop someone from really hurting you, because attacking transition is so deadly.
And another kind of phase or maybe a sub phase of the game then would be set pieces. And I think that, you mentioned, data and trends will tell you that like that transition moment is a deadly moment. And I think ever since maybe like the 2018 Men's World Cup, where so many goals were scored on set pieces, I think that like now in some teams in the Premier League, there's whole throw-in coaches as members of the staff. And so how do you go about planning for set pieces? And there's obviously, players who are really good and strong in the air and players who can put the ball wherever they want to from a physical demand perspective. What are some other roles that other players might play within set pieces that aren't either like be the big strong person in the air or you're the one playing the ball in?
Yeah, I'd say you've mentioned it. I'd say like there's set pieces and there's throw-ins, and they get put in the same bucket. But throw-ins is something that for the longest time no one really spoke about. But weirdly, in the set piece bucket, they're the one that happens 10 times more than anything else. So having structure around that, I think, is really important, both off the ball and on the ball. Because on the ball, your aim is to try and get the ball out of the area that the ball's coming from. And your aim defensively is to keep the ball in the area where the ball's just going to be thrown in from. So structure yourselves to be able to do that. So again, it's not a physicality thing. It's more a little bit of a understanding of how they're going to be able to do that, so they don't have to rely on their physicality to be able to do that. But then, yeah, when balls are being served into boxes and it becomes something that is, from an offensive perspective, a real goal scoring opportunity, if you're not the target, your job would be to run in a way where the opponent thinks you're the target. So you're like the decoy, basically. Or it's something that's come up a lot in the modern game, that you are standing in a position and you're not impacting the opponent, you're not doing anything to the opponent, but you just stand in a position that stops the opponent from going where they want to go. And the nuances of that have been so highlighted recently with my team, Arsenal, who are so good at it. And if you watch them, it's the person who ends up putting the ball in the net gets all the credit, but all the other guys are decoys or just mannequins. And that if you get it right and you get the service right, it can be deadly. Like they've been showing, it can be deadly.
And how has the game, you mentioned that, in the modern game now, and certainly there have been changes and progressions in the game in recent years. From a physical loading perspective, we can look at things like FIFA puts out a loading report from the World Cups, and we can compare 2015 in Canada, 2019 France, and then 2023 Australia, and look at how the demands have evolved on different playing positions more broadly. But from a tactical perspective and from your perspective, how has the game changed in recent years?
It constantly evolves, I would say. I think just over time, because in the women's game, more resources, more access to things, players are getting stronger, fitter, faster. So the dealing of that is what, from a tactical perspective, I mentioned Chawinga and Banda for the NWSL specifically. They just changed the dynamic of how you had to defend, because they are so much faster than anyone else. You can't, Chawinga especially, you can't even sometimes strategically do anything, because she can get anything. She can catch any ball, and you can't catch her. So that's been an evolution of just being able to deal with that. And you now see more and more teams looking to sign those types of players, because it's been so impactful to our league over the last couple of years. So the league changes all the time. The way that teams play in the league has consistently evolved. I think back to the old days of the rain, when the Reign and Kansas were successful. And we were both quite possession orientated teams. And then when North Carolina were very dominant in like 17, 18, 19, that era, they were a little bit more physicality and a bit more vertical, and had the ability to play you in loads of different ways. And then I think that 21, 22 year was a bit more, it got back to a little bit more strategic and tactical. And I honestly think that's why we had success with the talent that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, this 24, 25, those past two seasons, it's become a little bit more, you're going to have to deal with pace in behind you again, and being able to deal with that. So there's just the evolution constantly of the game. So you have to adapt, or you're just not going to have success. So
Adapt or die.
That's it.
And then in your preparation for, let's say, a game on a weekend, at what point in the training week are you starting to discuss and train specific aspects or specific phases of the game from a tactical perspective? At what point are you still maybe there's something from the previous game that you want to correct or have a teaching moment on? So at what point how do you set up the training week from a tactical perspective?
Yeah, I think training weeks, the when you do something is often based off your cadence in the week. So for us, for the longest time, we used to have a match day -3 if we could as an off day. And then we would come back in and do match day -2 train, which would be our tactical day. And then match day -1's like just solidifying the tactics we'd done the day before, and then game. We actually moved to a match day -2 off last year, which in the NWSL is quite a good one because it's often a travel day. Because of the amount of distance that we travel, we can have that as a recovery day. The players come in fresher on that match day -1 day. But then what it's meant is we have to push our tactical day earlier in the week. So what we tend to do, if we, depending on our schedule and travel, if we've got a 4-5 day lead in, it would be the first day back would be to address any of the things that we'd seen in previous games, whether that be in film or on the field. And then the next day after that, so match day like +2 or +3, depending on what we've come back into, would be like a real intense day. And there may be tactical stuff in it, but we do very small spaces, lots of change of direction, lots of actions, lots of players having the ability to express themselves technically in that day. And then the match day -3 day is tactical day. So that can be done in loads of different ways, but from a physical perspective, you're at a point now where your players are probably ready to expose hamstrings again. So now high speed running, sprints are something that you're going to start to expose them to again. And often we end up doing just a majority of our tactical work in an 11v11 game scenario, whether that be just a normal game or we've tweaked a drill to look similar to a game. But yeah, from that physical perspective, it's making sure we're doing that work when players are comfortable enough to expose their hamstrings again. Because if we do it when they're not, then we risk them of injury.
How much of, what you know about that is from, you have your A license, right? And so how much of it comes from the coaching formal education that you have? How much of it is from, you are known as a player's coach. Players love playing for you. I've seen it firsthand. You develop such great relationships and give players a lot of autonomy and allow them to kind of collaborate with you. So how much of that comes from conversations with them? How much of that comes from communication with the performance staff and the medical staff? What has helped kind of inform your ability to recognize hey, we're going to be exposing their hamstrings here, make sure that they're ready for that?
Yeah, honestly, I'd say for the longest time, I didn't have a sports performance person. So
Hmm.
at Arsenal, I didn't have one. The early days of the Rain, I didn't have one with the Rain until 2016. So I would be leaning on people that I knew. Um, so I was lucky enough that when I worked in England, I worked for the FA part time with the England teams, mainly with the younger teams. But we would have sports scientists and the people that I was exposed to. Dawn Scott, I've been friends with since I was 18. We worked together a lot. And then Ellie Mabry, who I worked with at Birmingham, and then obviously came out to the States. When I was on my own, I'd be calling them, asking them loads of questions. I remember I managed to get a catapult system. I had no idea how to use it, and I just used to upload it every day and get someone to read it for me and tell me what it meant. So like over the years, I just had to do that stuff because I didn't have um, the expertise in the room. And over the years of having those people, which I'm very thankful to have done, um, I've always been intrigued how that side of the game's evolved because yeah, I was so exposed to it early on in my career because I had to be. And I'm thankful for that. Like, people are always like, oh God, I can't believe that you didn't. But I think it's helped me because I have a deeper understanding of that side of the game. I understand why your sports performance people are saying, don't do this on this day and do it on that day. Like, I get it. I'm not gonna. I'll ask questions if I don't understand, but I have enough of a knowledge base, I think, to be able to hold my own in the room, which is comfortable. And I'm trying to think on my licenses in the States. We did a little bit with John Cohn. He came in and did some stuff, but it was mainly around the periodization of a season rather than like the in depth of what day to do what. But it is available to coaches. It's just often people don't do it because they have this expert sitting in the room. Whereas I like to be able to have a conversation with those experts in the room at a deeper level where it's not just, I want that information because I feel like I have a knowledge base that I can read it and see it, and I'll lean on you when I don't. But yeah, I think it's helped me along the way.
Yeah, I found that to be so helpful when we worked together. I remember I give this example often actually when people ask me about how to communicate with head coaches and finding the balance. Because my true philosophy is that like the head coach is the one who kind of sets the terms of what the team is going to do, and the role of performance and medical is to support that the best that we can. And so I remember I get asked that a lot, like, how do you balance that with like supporting what the head coach wants with like, ooh, but physically maybe we need to be careful here or we have to push this instead. And there was one specific session that I remember where you were working on outside backs, like a transition moment, going from defending to attack, specifically using the width and the outside backs. And I remember like looking at the iPad and I'm like, oh my gosh, Lou and Soph are getting so much high speed running distance right now. I was like, hey, Laura is like, went up to you middle of the session, like, Soph and Lou are really high. Is there any way we can like rotate them? And you're like, yeah, no problem. Like, and then like on the next rep, you just like put other outside backs in, and it was like a
Yeah,
non-issue. And it was just so helpful to be able to have that conversation. And you could tell that you just had that knowledge or that wisdom and inherently knew like, yeah, if I want Soph and Lou to play at the weekend and Nicole's telling me right now that their high speed running is really high, like I don't want to really risk that. So yeah, let's get other reps in. So that was super helpful. And I use that session as a specific example often.
nice. Yeah, I'm a big believer of that because I think from a coaching perspective, if you've got your week planned out and say you get that intense day wrong, and I don't know, that's a good example. A player who plays wide is getting high speed running, where really that high speed running is you're saving that for the next day because you're going to do 11v11. If you expose them in that day, and you don't deal with it in that moment, it's going to wreck your next day. And then if it doesn't wreck your next day and you ignore it, it's going to wreck your weekend. So I always say to all of my staff, come tell me in the moment, I'll change it. Don't like let it ride. And then at the end of it go, oh, Lou got 400 meters high speed running and she's dead. Let's knock it dead as soon as we can, so that we can prepare ourselves better later in the week. So yeah, I'm a big believer of that.
Yeah, well, Laura, this conversation is like I love the tactical side of the game. It's what made me enjoy as a player. That's kind of what I was best at and what I enjoyed the most. And getting the chance to talk to you again about it. And also selfishly, I'm coaching a WPSL team this summer. And so I'm also
Nice.
selfishly like, oh, let me get some tips from Laura before I start that. But I do have 2 rapid fire questions that I ask every guest. They're more fill in the blank than anything else. And so the first one is, I wish every medical and performance practitioner in the women's game understood this about the tactical side of the game.
Oh, good question. The uncontrollable moments we can solve. I think often medical performance people get real worried when players come in from rehab into, back into something, and football is uncontrollable. We can't say what's going to happen in the game. But that's okay. Like it will be okay. Like we can help help control those uncontrollable moments.
We love that. And then the last one is, my favorite thing about working in women's soccer is?
Oh, the people. There's no doubt. The people that you meet, the people you get to work with, the players. You mentioned it. Like I really enjoy the camaraderie of a locker room and being around a team and being on the road and all those things. Like, I'm getting a bit older now, and that's what keeps me young for sure.
Yeah, it's always nice when we're going in and always just hearing like Adele blasting and you singing along.
We have the best jobs in the world. So if you can't enjoy it, then you're doing the wrong thing.
Exactly. I remember so many sessions, and you mentioned some of the players we had that year. I remember a couple of sessions of seeing like Maro or Eugenie do something and just like looking at like you and Sam and being like, did that just happen? Like, did they just do that? Like, that's a joke. That the Pinot, Rose, Huge, Maro, like it just ridiculous. Like Jess, like ridiculous players on that team.
Very talented, yeah. That one hurt me a lot when we didn't win that semi-final, because I was like, this team should have won that.
The semifinal that we had to literally take sponges and try to sponge up the field ahead of the game.
That was a day. Everyone always talks to me about XG, and they're like, XG, you don't get enough XG in this XG. And I always refer to that game and say, we had an XG of 3.84 and Washington had an XG of 1.1 and we lost 2-1. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. What matters is what the actual, what the actual goals are.
Exactly. So yeah, but fun. That's it. That's the best part of the game, is the people you get to meet and the relationships you get to build, and the camaraderie around the whole team is just amazing.
Great. Well, Laura, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time for this.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Of course.